Köszöntöm, szervusztok! Hetek óta szervezzük ezt az interjút Ben Rhodesszal, aki még az Obama-adminisztrációban volt stratégiai kommunikációért és beszédírásért felelős nemzetbiztonsági tanácsadó-helyettes, illetve jelenleg a Pod Save America egyik meghatározó szerzője, alapvetően külpolitikai ügyekkel foglalkozik. Az interjú természetesen létre is jött, amelyben izgalmas részleteket osztott meg a várható következő Trump ciklusról, illetve arról, hogy a demokrata pártnak milyen következtetéseket kell levonnia mindabból a vereségből, amelyet tavaly kellett elkönyvelnie. Ez az interjú később fog majd publikálásra kerülni, ugyanis néhány órával az interjú készítése előtt jött a hír, miszerint az úgynevezett Magnitsky törvény, illetve mechanizmus keretében Rogán Antalt szankciós listára helyezte az Egyesült Államok, hát éppen leköszönőben lévő kormánya. Hogy pontosabb képet kapjunk arról, hogy hogyan is működik ez a mechanizmus, és mit jelent ez az egész szankciós eljárásrend az egyik legfontosabb magyar kormánytaggal szemben. Nos, ebben kértük Ben Rhodes segítségét, aki örömmel válaszol ezekre a kérdésekre. Szóval most ez következik, és természetesen a következő hetekben publikálni fogjuk majd a teljes interjút is. Hello Ben Rhodes, thank you very much for accepting this interview.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I would like to start with this recent development where Antal Rogán, the chief of staff of the prime minister, was placed on a sanction list under the so-called Magnitsky Act. It's not a very familiar term in the Hungarian context. Can you explain in broad terms what this Magnitsky Act means and what are the possible consequences of such an action by the State Department?
Sure. The first Magnitsky Act was actually passed during the Obama administration, and it was focused on Russia. And it was meant to give the United States government authority to sanction individual Russians after the murder of Sergei Magnitsky, a human rights lawyer in Russia. And it was expanded in, I think, 2016 to the global Magnitsky Act. So it was originally focused on Russia, and it was used to designate individual Russians who were engaged in human rights violations or corruption. But the global Magnitsky Act expanded it to a global authority so that the United States government uses it to sanction individuals. At first, it was focused again on human rights violations, but it's kind of been expanded to focus also on corruption, as the U.S. government has been focused more and more on corruption as a threat to democracy, corruption as a threat to the well-being of people in different countries. It's been used in many different places now. And essentially what it does is it sanctions individuals, which means that those individuals, there are penalties for people who engage in business with those individuals. They're essentially barred from accessing the U.S. financial system. And the reason that's a big deal is that, most of the global financial system runs through the U.S. dollar. And so it's a powerful sanction that is meant to essentially isolate an individual that has been charged with corruption or human rights violations by the U.S. government.
Why do you think this happened now? So the Biden administration have approximately 30 days left, and there is a lot of talk right now in Hungary that maybe a second Donald Trump presidency will pull this back. Is that a possibility?
I think it is a possibility. These are lists of people. So the Treasury Department of the United States puts individuals on a list. That means that they're sanctioned, but they can also be removed from a list. And so if an incoming Trump administration, which has far better relations with Viktor Orban and his government, chooses, they can delist, is the term, an individual. And so they very well may do that in this case. I think that doing it on the way out the door, knowing that Trump might delist the individual, is meant to send a message, I think, though. These sanctions also have a kind of messaging impact. And this is the United States government kind of saying to the Hungarian people, to Europe and the world, hey, this guy's a corrupt actor. And we believe that this guy has used his position to enrich himself. He's stolen from the Hungarian people. The ambassador in Hungary, David Pressman, who I worked with in the Obama administration, has been focused on this issue of kleptocracy, which is a growing problem as we've seen the rise of these kind of autocratic, populist, right-wing models around the world, where you have a kleptocratic system, where you have individuals at the top who enrich themselves, enrich their cronies, enrich their friends at the expense of ordinary people. And in the EU context, this is also important because one of the things that the U.S. government's been concerned concerned about is the corrupt use of EU funds that have flowed into Hungary and that have found their way to Orban associates. So even if he is delisted, I think this is, putting a cloud of shame essentially over, frankly, the whole Orban government, and saying that they're engaged in corruption, and we want the Hungarian people and Europe to know this.
How usual is that the State Department uses or issues this mechanism against any given country who is member of the NATO?
It's very unusual. I'm not even aware of that happening before, to tell you the truth. I mean, the examples I'd give is there are a lot of Russians on the Magnitsky list. They were used to sanction individuals involved in the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. So some of the Saudi officials who were involved in the murder of Khashoggi were sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. Some leaders in Latin America who've tried to steal elections or who've engaged in human rights abuses have been put on the list. I'm not aware of it being used against a NATO ally before. I could be wrong, but let's just say it's definitely rare. And I think it serves to send a message that this is not restricted to U.S. adversaries, that corruption, human rights violations, anti-democratic actions are going to be targeted by the United States. Now, obviously, I don't know that Donald Trump is going to do that and continue that policy. And frankly, if I have I'm not, intricately familiar with this case, although I wrote a lot about Viktor Orban's administration in my last book, and I did a lot of research on the level of corruption. So this is not a new issue. And so if I have a criticism of the Biden administration, it's why did you wait 4 years to do this? Presumably, you had information about corruption.
And what is your explanation for this?
I think sometimes when you are a lame duck president, that's the term that we use for a president after the election and before the inauguration, the next one. You start to empty the cupboard. You start to do things that are more, politically risky, that might have caused diplomatic friction that you would have had to deal with. But again, that would be my criticism here. If you were going to do this, I would have done this earlier, because I have to imagine that they had the information to do this before the U.S. election. So, I see why they do it. It has a messaging purpose. It sends a message about the nature of the Orban government and certainly the individual on the list. But it would have, been a more courageous act, I think, to have done it earlier in the administration.
So this afternoon in Hungary, when Mr. Pressman just announced this new development related to the sanctions list, he said that other people may have been involved in these activities related to Mr. Rogán. Do you think it is safe to expect other names rather than Rogán in the remaining time of the Biden administration?
I don't think so. If you were going to sanction people in a particular government or country like Hungary, you'd probably put them out together. We used to do packages of these Magnitsky sanctions when I was in government. And so I would imagine this is the only one. I do think that, choosing Rogán, someone who's obviously been such a leading figure in the Fidesz party, in the Orban administration, it's focused on him, but I think it's meant to indicate that corruption is at the highest ranks of Fidesz and the highest ranks of the Hungarian government. And so, I would not expect further sanctions. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. There's only, 10 days left, a little more than 10 days left in the Biden administration. I would guess, and I have not been party to these discussions, I'm not in the Biden administration, it's possible that Ambassador Pressman might have recommended further people, and they just chose this individual as the most prominent figure that they could establish a basis for sanction. So that's probably what happened here. They chose him because both they felt he was engaged in this activity, but also because of his prominence and what it says about the nature of the entire enterprise.
Mr. Rhodes, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for this brief insight to this unknown mechanism, which is, I think, something which the Hungarian public just right now finding out that such a mechanism is existing, and we will see what will be the consequences. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.